Hello. My name is Dimitri and I want to share my new life story with you. Can I take this for my grandmother? She is very cold, asked an 8-year-old girl with thin pigtails, pointing to an expensive women's jacket, carelessly thrown out next to a garbage container near an elite mansion. The housekeeper Svetlana nodded indifferently, continuing to drag another bag of things along the asphalt after the scandalous divorce of her owners. And returning home, to the frozen communal apartment, the girl helped her grandmother put on the found jacket and accidentally felt in a secret pocket a thick folder with documents that changed their whole life. Nastia stood on the porch of the Krylovs' mansion, clutching a shabby grocery bag in her hands. The December wind pierced her thin jacket, which had long since become small and barely buttoned on her chest. The girl watched as the housekeeper Svetlana methodically carried out bag after bag from the house, throwing them into a pile near the garbage containers. Svetlana was a middle-aged woman with a tired face and indifferent eyes. She had worked in the Krylovs' house for 5 years and had seen everything, but she did not recall such a scandal as the owners had caused 3 days ago. Broken dishes, torn photographs, screams until the morning. And now the oligarch's wife had left for London, leaving in order to throw out everything that reminded them of their life together. Among the discarded things, Nastia noticed a dark blue jacket with a fur hood. Even an inexperienced eye could see that the thing was expensive, clearly not one of those sold in ordinary stores. The jacket lay on top of the bag, as if it had been thrown at the last moment, without much concern for where it would fall. "Can I take this jacket for Grandma?" Nastia asked quietly when Svetlana came out with another batch of things. "She is very sick, and it is cold in our house, the radiators are barely warm." Svetlana looked at the girl with an indifferent glance and shrugged her shoulders. "Take what you want. It's all going to the trash anyway." The owner told her not to leave anything. She said she didn't want to see even a thread from her past life. Nastia carefully picked up the jacket, surprised by its lightness and the softness of the fabric. She had never held anything like it in her hands. At home, she and her grandmother Vera Ivanovna only had an old quilted jacket that she had been wearing since her time working at the hospital. "Thank you very much," the girl whispered, clutching the jacket to her chest. Svetlana was no longer listening as she dragged the next bag. Broken photo frames, shards of crystal glasses, and scraps of letters jingled in it. The entire history of the Krylov family was turning into trash that would be taken away by the city service tomorrow. Nastia hurried home to an old 2-story house on the outskirts of the city, where she and her grandmother occupied one room in a communal apartment. The entrance greeted her with the smell of dampness and cold, which seemed to penetrate even through the walls. The radiators in the house were working intermittently, and the residents had been complaining to the management company for months. Grandmother Vera Ivanovna was lying in bed, wrapped in all the blankets that were in the house. At 72, she looked fragile and tired, although her eyes still retained a lively mind. She had worked as a therapist in a city hospital for 30 years, but her pension was laughable, and her health was failing her more and more often. "Granny, look what I found," Nastia happily said, showing her jacket. "They let me take it for you. It's very warm, Bekia, and beautiful." Vera Ivanovna raised herself with difficulty, examining her granddaughter's find. Her experienced eye immediately assessed the quality of the material and workmanship. Quote, "Nastia, this is a very expensive thing. Are you sure it was okay to take it?" Nastia nodded, telling about her meeting with the housekeeper and the mountains of discarded things. Vera Ivanovna listened, shaking her head. She knew about the scandalous divorce of the Krylovs from the local news, but she had no idea that things had come to this. Quote, "Well, if they allowed it, then thank you to the kind people," the old woman sighed, allowing her granddaughter to help her put on her jacket. The jacket fit perfectly, as if it had been sewn especially for Vera Ivanovna. The soft lining was pleasantly warm, and the fur on the hood protected her neck from drafts. For the first time in many months, the grandmother felt real warmth. Nastia was helping to zip up the zipper when her fingers came across something hard near the inside pocket. At first she thought it was just a design feature, but upon closer inspection she discovered a hidden pocket, almost unnoticeable among the folds of the lining. Quote, "Granny, there's something here," the girl said in surprise, feeling for the thick folder. Vera Ivanovna carefully pulled out the contents of the pocket. It was a transparent file folder, stuffed with documents and certificates. On top lay a children's medical policy in the name of Artem Sergeyevich Krylov, 7 years old. Vera Ivanovna muttered strangely, examining the documents in the light of the desk lamp. "The Krylovs don't have children, everyone knows that." She began to carefully study the papers, and her face gradually changed, reflecting growing anxiety, medical reports, genetic test results, medical history extracts. Everything pointed to a rare genetic disease, which Vera Ivanovna knew well from her medical practice. Quote, "What is it, Grandma?" Nastya asked, seeing how pale the old woman had become. Vera Ivanovna silently handed her the birth certificate. The father's name was clearly written, Igor Nikolaevich Krylov. Mother Elena Sergeyevna Morozova. Next to her was a death certificate for Elena Sergeyevna, dated 3 months earlier. It turns out that this rich man has a son he doesn't even know, Vera Ivanovna said quietly, continuing to sort through the documents. Among the papers was a conclusion from German specialists with a translation into Russian. They recommended an urgent bone marrow transplant at a cost of $2 million. Without treatment, the child would not live more than 6 months. Vera Ivanovna put the documents aside and sighed heavily. Over the many years of medical practice, she had seen many children with a similar diagnosis. She knew how quickly the disease develops, how the children suffer, how their parents suffer. But this boy, apparently, was all alone. Nastya looked at her grandmother in silence, not fully understanding the seriousness of the situation, but feeling her tension. She picked up a childhood photograph, which was also in the folder. The picture showed a skinny boy with big sad eyes and a pale face. "He looks like that guy from TV," the girl noticed. "The one who always shows up on the news." Vera Ivanovna nodded, looking at the photograph. The resemblance was indeed noticeable, especially in the cut of the eyes and the shape of the chin. She remembered the recent stories about the bankruptcy of Krylovo Enterprises, about his nervous breakdown right in the courtroom. Quote, "Where is this boy now?" Nastya asked, without taking her eyes off the photograph. The grandmother took the documents again, looking for an answer to this question. One of the certificates began with an address, City Orphanage No. 7. There was also a note about the child's admission after the death of the mother. Vera Ivanovna closed her eyes, imagining a 7-year-old boy dying in an orphanage from a disease that could be cured, while his father did not even suspect his existence. The conscience of a doctor and just a person did not allow her to stand aside. The next day, Vera Ivanovna called her old friend Tamara Mikhailovna, who worked as a nurse in the city children's hospital. Over the long years of friendship, they had often helped each other in difficult situations, and Vera Ivanovna knew that she could trust her with a delicate request. "Tamara, I need your help," she said quietly into the phone, trying not to wake her sleeping granddaughter. "Could you find out about a boy in the 7th orphanage? Artyom Krylov, 7 years old. They say he is very ill." Tamara Mikhailovna was silent for a moment, thinking about the request. She knew Vera Ivanovna well and understood that she would never interfere in other people's affairs without serious reasons. In addition, medical workers from different city institutions often exchanged information about difficult cases. Quote, "Wait. I'll call Zinaida Petrovna now. She works there as a senior nurse," Tamara answered. "I'll call you back in half an hour." Quote, the wait seemed endless to Vera Ivanovna. She walked around the small room, every now and then glancing at the documents that lay on the table under the desk lamp. Artyom's childhood photograph seemed to be watching her with sad eyes, and the old woman's heart sank with pity. When the phone finally rang, Vera Ivanovna grabbed the receiver at the first zhigudka. Tamara's voice sounded worried and sad at the same time. "Vera, this boy is really there, and things are really bad for him. Zinaida says that he hardly gets out of bed, he is very weak. The doctors can't help. He needs special treatment, which we don't have in our city." Vera Ivanovna closed her eyes, feeling a wave of despair rolling over her. She was a doctor and understood that every day the delay brought the child closer to the inevitable end, and his father did not even suspect the existence of his son. "Tamara, is there any way to get to him? Maybe under the guise of volunteers or relatives? I really need to see him." Volunteers from different organizations come there regularly, Tamara thought out loud. "I can come to an agreement with the headmistress Nina Petrovna. She is a good woman. I will say that you want to help sick children. After all, you have a medical education." The next day, Vera Ivanovna and Nastya went to orphanage No. 7. The old 3-story building looked sad even on a sunny winter day. The paint on the walls was peeling, the windows were covered with bars, and there was not a single child to be seen in the yard. Headmistress Nina Petrovna met them in her office on the first floor. She was a woman of about 50 with a tired but kind face. Children's drawings hung on the walls, and on the table there was a photograph of a large group of children of different ages. "I am very glad that there are people who do not remain indifferent to someone else's misfortune," said Nina Petrovna, pouring tea from a thermos. "We have 42 children now, and each one needs attention, and some, like Artyom, need much more than we can give. She said that the boy was admitted to them 3 months ago after the death of his mother. The woman died in the hospital from oncology, and until her last day she kept saying that his father would definitely come for her son. But no one showed up, and the child had to be placed in an orphanage. Artyom is very quiet and withdrawn, Nina Petrovna continued. He hardly plays with other children and gets tired quickly. The doctors say that he needs special treatment, but where can we get it? Our budget barely covers the most basic expenses. Vera Ivanovna listened, feeling a lump growing in her throat. She imagined a 7-year-old boy slowly fading away in a government home, not understanding why the dad his mother promised never came for him. "Can we see him?" she asked cautiously. "I'm a doctor. Maybe I can help with something?" Quote, Nina Petrovna nodded and led them up to the second floor, to the room where the younger children were. There were several beds in the large, bright room, and a play corner with toys and books by the window. Artyom was sitting on the edge of the bed, leafing through a children's picture book. He was very thin and pale, with large dark eyes that seemed too old for a child's face. When they entered, the boy raised his head and looked at them with curiosity, but without much interest. "Artyomka, you have guests," Nina Petrovna said affectionately. "This is Aunt Vera and Nastya. They want to play with you." Quote, the boy nodded silently, put the book down and tried to get up, but his movements were slow and uncertain, as if each step was difficult. Nastya instinctively stepped forward, ready to support him if necessary. "Hello, Artyom," she said quietly. "Do you want me to read you a book? Or can we play games?" Quote, the boy looked at her carefully, as if assessing whether this girl with kind eyes could be trusted. Then he nodded slowly and pointed to the book he had just read. It was a fairy tale about a brave knight who saved a princess from an evil dragon. Nastya sat down next to him on the bed and began to read, trying to make the voices of the different characters funny and interesting. Artyom listened attentively, sometimes quietly, laughing at the particularly funny moments, but Vera Ivanovna noticed how quickly he got tired, how often he put his hand to his chest, as if it was difficult for him to breathe. Half an hour later, the boy noticeably weakened and asked to rest. Nina Petrovna led the guests back to her office, where they could talk frankly. "You see what he has to do?" the headmistress said sadly. "Before, he at least tried to play with other children, but now he lies down most of the time. I'm afraid that he will soon completely fall ill." Quote, Vera Ivanovna nodded, understanding the seriousness of the situation. Her medical experience told her that the child really did not have much time. Every day the disease progressed, destroying his body from the inside. "What did his mother say before she died?" she asked as naturally as possible. "Maybe there are some relatives who could help." Nina Petrovna thought, remembering the last days of Elena Morozova's life. She was often delirious, calling out some man's name. Igor, it seemed, said that he would definitely come for Artyom, that he was a rich and influential man. But we thought that these were just the morbid fantasies of a dying woman. Vera Ivanovna and Nastya exchanged glances, but did not betray their excitement. They thanked Nina Petrovna for the opportunity to see the boy and promised to come again to brighten up his loneliness. On the way home they were silent, each thinking about her own. Nastya could not forget Artyom's sad eyes and how hard it was for him to just sit and listen to a fairy tale. And Vera Ivanovna painfully thought about what to do with the information she had received. At home, they turned on the TV to distract themselves from their heavy thoughts, but the first news report made them shudder. A report from the arbitration court building appeared on the screen, where another hearing on the bankruptcy of one of Igor Krylov's companies was taking place. The oligarch looked haggard and exhausted. His expensive suit hung on him as if on a hanger. His eyes were red from lack of sleep. When the judge announced the decision to declare another of his enterprises bankrupt, Krylov suddenly grabbed his head and began shouting something inarticulate. Security hurried to take him out of the courtroom, while journalists clicked cameras and speculated about the businessman's mental state. The commentator reported that this was already the third such breakdown in the last month. Nastya looked closely at the screen, comparing Krylov's face with Artyom's photo, which they had seen in the documents. The resemblance was obvious, especially in the shape of the eyes and the line of the eyebrows. "Granny, let's show Artyom a photo of this guy," she suggested. "What if he recognizes him?" Vera Ivanovna nodded, understanding her granddaughter's logic. If the mother really told her son about his father, showed him his photos, the boy could confirm their guesses. The next day they came to the orphanage again. Nastya brought a tablet with her, on which she found several photos of Krylov from the internet. Artyom greeted them with more willingness than the first time. He even smiled faintly at the sight of the girl. "Artyom, do you want me to show you some interesting pictures?" Nastya said, sitting down next to him. The boy nodded, and she turned on the tablet, opening the first photo. It was an official portrait of Krylov from the time of his successful business. The child's reaction was immediate and unexpected. "Daddy," he whispered quietly, reaching out to the screen. "Mom showed me the same pictures. She said that Daddy was very busy, but he would definitely come for me." Quote, the boy's eyes filled with tears, and he pressed himself against Nastya, as if seeking protection and comfort. The girl hugged him, feeling her own heart pounding wildly with excitement and pity. Vera Ivanovna silently watched this scene, finally convinced that their guesses were correct. Artyom really was Krylov's son, and his dying mother hoped until the last that his father would find out about the child's existence and save him. Like this video so that YouTube understands that you are interested in such video stories and recommends more quality stories. Returning home after the second visit to Artyom, Vera Ivanovna could not find a place for herself for a long time. The boy's words about Dad, his reaction to Krylov's photo finally convinced her that there was no more time to hesitate. Every day of delay could be the child's last. She found the number of one of Krylov's companies on the internet and dialed it, nervous as a schoolgirl before an exam. The polite voice of the secretary was heard on the line, but when Vera Ivanovna asked to connect her with Igor Nikolaevich on a personal matter, the woman's voice immediately changed. "Igor Nikolaevich has not received anyone for 2 weeks, the secretary said dryly. "He is undergoing treatment with a psychotherapist and is not negotiating. If you have a business proposal, contact his deputies." Quote, Vera Ivanovna tried to explain that it was a matter of life and death for the child, but the secretary had already hung up. The old woman looked at the phone in confusion, realizing that she could not get through to the oligarch in the usual ways. Nastya, who heard the conversation, thoughtfully chewed on her pencil, doing her homework. "Granny, let's just go to his house," she suggested with childish spontaneity. "We know where he lives. Maybe that Aunt Svetlana can help deliver a letter to him." The idea didn't seem so crazy to Vera Ivanovna. Indeed, sometimes a direct approach can be more effective than official channels. Besides, Svetlana had already seen them and could treat them with understanding. The next day they went to the Krylovs' mansion again. The winter day was cloudy and cold. Snow was falling in large flakes, covering the paths in the garden. The house looked gloomy and lifeless. Only one window on the second floor was lit. Svetlana didn't open the door right away, and when she saw them, her expression was surprised and wary. "Have you forgotten something?" she asked, wrapping herself in a warm robe. "Or do you want to take something else from the discarded things?" Vera Ivanovna took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "We really need to talk to Igor Nikolaevich. It concerns his son, about whom he doesn't know. The boy is dying, and only he can save him." Quote, Svetlana shook her head incredulously. "What son? The owner has no children, everyone knows that, and in general, he is now in such a state that he does not talk to anyone. He has been sitting in the office for a week, barely eating, only drinking." But when Vera Ivanovna showed her a copy of Artyom's birth certificate, the housekeeper's face changed. She carefully studied the document, checking the name and patronymic, the date of birth. Her eyes widened in surprise and alarm. "My God, is it really true?" she muttered. "I remember this woman Elena. She sometimes came to the owner about 3 years ago, beautiful, so quiet. Then she stopped showing up, and he never spoke about her." Svetlana led them into the living room and pointed to the window overlooking the courtyard. Through the glass, one could see the window of Krylov's office on the second floor. There, in an armchair by the fireplace, sat a man in a wrinkled shirt with a bottle in his hand. "He's been sitting like this for a whole week," Svetlana said sadly. Documents were scattered all over the floor, his phone was turned off. "I brought him food, but he barely touched it. He said he had lost everything and didn't want to live." Krylov really did look like a man on the verge of complete despair. His usually perfectly styled hair was disheveled, his face was covered with stubble. Bankruptcy documents, court summonses, and letters from creditors were scattered around the armchair. From time to time, he raised the bottle to his lips, but he drank slowly, as if it were a cure for unbearable mental pain. His gaze was fixed on one point, and it seemed that he did not see anything around him. Vera Ivanovna watched this picture with pain in her heart. She understood that a person in such a state might simply not perceive information about his son adequately. They needed to find a way to reach his consciousness, to break through the wall of despair and indifference. While they were standing by the window, Vera Ivanovna's phone rang. It was Tamara Mikhailovna, and her voice was worried and urgent. "Vera, Zenaida from the orphanage just called me. That boy Artyom has started bleeding internally. They put him in the medical unit." Vera Ivanovna felt the earth slipping out from under her feet. She knew that internal bleeding with such a diagnosis meant a critical deterioration in the condition. It could be weeks or even days, not months. "What do the doctors say?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm. "Things are bad," Tamara answered honestly. Zenaida said that the district doctor was just throwing up his hands. Urgent hospitalization at the regional hospital was needed, but they were unlikely to be able to help even there. "We need specialists, which we don't have in our city." After hanging up, Vera Ivanovna looked at Krylov, who was still sitting in his chair, lost in drunken melancholy. Time was working against them, and the only person who could save Artyom didn't even suspect his existence. Nastya quietly approached her grandmother and took her hand. "What are we going to do?" she asked, and her childish voice sounded like an adult's determination. Vera Ivanovna looked at her granddaughter, then at Svetlana, who was anxiously awaiting their decision. A plan was maturing in her head, perhaps a desperate one, but this was the only chance to get through to Krylov. "I'll write him a letter," she said decisively. "I'll tell you everything and attach copies of the documents. Maybe when he sees the birth certificate and the boy's photograph, something will change in his mind." At home, Vera Ivanovna sat for a long time over a blank sheet of paper, choosing her words. How to explain to a person that he has a son who is dying? How to make him believe something that sounds like the plot of a melodrama? How to break through the wall of despair and indifference? In the end, she wrote simply and honestly, told how they found the documents, about their visits to the orphanage, about Artyom's words, who recognized his father in the photograph. She described the boy's condition and begged Krylov to at least come and make sure that her words were true. She attached a copy of the birth certificate, medical reports, and a childhood photograph of Artyom to the letter. Nastya helped seal the envelope and write the address of the mansion on it. In the evening, they came to Krylov's house again. Nastya carefully approached the front door and shoved the envelope into the crack under the door, trying to push it as far as possible so that it would be noticeable. Now all that was left was to wait and hope that Krylov would find the letter and read it, that the words about his dying son would be able to pierce the armor of his depression and force him to act. But time passed, and in the orphanage Artyom's condition continued to worsen with each passing hour. For 3 days the letter lay on the floor in the hallway of the mansion, lost among advertising leaflets and utility bills. Krylov did not leave his office, and Svetlana, busy cleaning the empty rooms, did not pay attention to the mail. Only when she decided to tidy up the hall, the envelope fell into her hands. Quote, "Igor Nikolaevich, here is a letter for you," she said, knocking on the office door. It seemed that something important was written by hand. Krylov did not even raise his head, continuing to stare blankly into the fireplace, where the coals had long since gone out. Quote, "Leave it on the table," he muttered in a hoarse voice. "All the same, only IOUs and subpoenas." But Svetlana remembered his conversation with Vera Ivanovna, and decided to violate subordination. She went up to the chair and put the envelope right on the owner's lap. Quote, "It says something about your son," she said quietly. "About a boy who is dying." Krylov slowly raised his eyes, as if not understanding the meaning of the words he had heard. His face was swollen from alcohol and insomnia. His eyes were red from constant strain. Quote, "What son?" he asked again, mechanically taking the envelope in his hands. Svetlana silently left, leaving him alone with the letter. Krylov looked at the neat female handwriting for a long time, then opened the envelope with unsteady fingers. The first thing he saw was a childhood photograph and froze, recognizing something painfully familiar in the boy's features. When he unfolded the birth certificate, the world around him seemed to stop. Artyom Sergeyevich Krylov, Father Igor Nikolaevich Krylov. The date of birth showed that the child was born exactly 9 months after his last meeting with Elena. He recognized her handwriting in the medical records, the same neat letters that she wrote in her letters 3 years ago. Elena always wrote by hand, saying that it was more personal and sincere. Now her hand was forever frozen on the medical certificates of their common son. Krylov read Vera Ivanovna's letter, and with each line the alcoholic fog in his head dissipated, giving way to horror and despair. Son, he has a son who lies in an orphanage and dies while he drowns his sorrows in whiskey. He remembered the last conversation with Elena, when she tried to tell him something, but he was too busy preparing for an important deal. He remembered how she started a sentence and fell silent several times, seeing his impatience, and then simply left, saying that she did not want to bother him anymore. Quote, "God, what have I done?" he whispered, pressing the photograph of his son to his chest. "She wanted to tell me about the pregnancy, but I didn't even let her speak, and now she's dead." And our boy Krylov jumped up from his chair so abruptly that he knocked over the bottle of whiskey on the carpet, but he no longer paid attention to the spilled alcohol, feverishly searching for the car keys among the scattered documents. His hands were shaking so much that he could barely button his shirt. Svetlana, hearing the noise, looked into the office and saw a completely transformed owner. Instead of a weak-willed drunkard, a man seized by desperate determination stood before her. "Get the car ready," he quickly ordered. "I need to get to orphanage number 7. Immediately. The road to the orphanage seemed endless to him. Krylov sat in the back seat, clutching Artyom's photograph and medical documents in his hands. He tried to imagine what his son looked like now, what he was thinking about, whether he even knew about his father's existence. At the entrance to the orphanage he was met by a worried Nina Petrovna. She immediately recognized him from numerous photographs in the press, but the oligarch's appearance shocked her. Unshaven, with reddened eyes, in wrinkled clothes, he hardly resembled a successful businessman. "Are you Igor Nikolaevich Krylov?" she asked, although the answer was obvious. "Have you come for Artyom? We've been waiting for so long." "Where is he?" Quote, Krylov asked hoarsely, unable to utter another word. "Where is my son?" Nina Petrovna led him through the corridors of the orphanage to the medical block. Her face was serious and sad, which made Krylov's heart squeeze with a premonition of trouble. "He became ill last night," she explained quietly. "The internal bleeding intensified. He lost consciousness." In a small hospital room on a narrow bed lay a skinny boy hooked up to an IV. His face was waxy, his breathing shallow and ragged. A nurse sat next to the bed, regularly checking the child's pulse. Krylov approached the bed and knelt down. Unable to believe what he was seeing, this was his son, his flesh and blood, and he was dying while his father did not know of his existence. The boy looked like him as a child, the same dark hair and the same stubborn chin. "Artyom," he called quietly, carefully touching the child's hand. "Son, it's Daddy. I've come for you." Quote. But the boy did not react, immersed in deep oblivion. The doctor, the grandfather of the house, an elderly man with tired eyes, approached Krylov and put his hand on his shoulder. "His condition is critical," he said bluntly. "He has a rare form of leukemia. An urgent bone marrow transplant is needed." Quote, "How much time do we have?" Krylov asked, without taking his eyes off his son. The doctor paused, choosing his words. "A day, maybe 2. He would not survive without specialized care. He needed an operation at a world-class clinic in Germany or Israel. But that would cost a lot of money, which Dad did not have at home." Krylov stood up and resolutely headed for the exit. "Arrange for his transportation to the best clinic in Germany," he ordered. "Immediately. Money is not a problem." Quote, but when he tried to contact his banker, it turned out that all his accounts had been frozen by court order. Credit lines were closed, real estate was seized, and former partners were avoiding meetings with him. In a few months, he had gone from being a billionaire to being bankrupt. In desperation, Krylov dialed his ex-wife in London. "Elena, I beg you," he said, barely holding back tears. "I have a son, he is dying. I need money for an operation, $2 million. I will pay it all back with interest." Quote. A cold laugh came from the receiver. "What a touching performance, Igor. First you ruined me in court, and now you're asking for money for your illegitimate children. I won't give you a penny. And don't call me again." The connection was lost, leaving Krylov alone with his despair. He stood in the hallway of the orphanage, realizing that for the first time in his life, his money and connections could not solve the most important problem. His son was dying a few meters away from him, and he was powerless to change anything. If you like this story, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos. Vera Ivanovna learned that Krylov had found a letter from Svetlana, who had called her late in the evening. The housekeeper said that the owner had gone to the orphanage and returned completely broken, constantly repeating that he was late, that his son was dying, and he could not help in any way. The next day, Vera Ivanovna and Nastya came to the Krylov mansion. Svetlana let them in without further ado. Questions. Her face expressed deep anxiety. He locked himself in the office and cried, she said quietly. Doesn't eat, doesn't drink, just looks at the boys' photos and repeats that he lost everything. They went up to the second floor and knocked carefully on the office door. Igor Nikolaevich, this is Vera Ivanovna, the one who wrote you the letter, the old woman called. I need to talk to you about Artyom. The door did not open right away. Krylov looked terrible. His eyes were red from tears, his face was sunken, his hands were shaking. On the table in front of him lay baby photos and medical records, and next to him stood an untouched plate of food. Quote, I didn't know, he said hoarsely, without looking up. She wanted to tell me, but I was too busy with my own affairs. Now Lena is dead, and our son is dying, and I can't do anything. All my money is frozen, the banks do not give loans. Vera Ivanovna sat down opposite him, and Nastya settled herself in the chair next to him, listening attentively to the adults' conversation. Quote, tell me about Yelena, the old woman asked. What was she like? How did you meet? Krylov slowly raised his head. A warm sadness appeared in his eyes. She worked as a translator in my company, was very quiet and smart, never asked for gifts, was not interested in money, said that she loved me, and not my bank account. He told how they dated for almost a year, how Elena never imposed herself, understanding that he was married. She was delicate and patient, never made a scene, did not demand a divorce, and then suddenly disappeared, saying only that she did not want to interfere with his life anymore. I thought that she was simply tired of our relationship, Krylov admitted. I did not look for her, did not try to find out the reasons, and she was pregnant and was afraid to tell me, knowing that I was going through a difficult divorce. Nastya suddenly got up from her chair and went to the window where the very jacket in which they found the documents was hanging. Uncle Igor, have you checked all the pockets in this jacket? She asked with childish spontaneity. Krylov looked at the girl in bewilderment. What jacket? This is my ex-wife's thing. She threw it away when she moved. Nastya began to feel the lining of the jacket, as she had done on the first day. Her fingers felt something hard in the waist area, where the lining was slightly thicker. Quote, Granny, there's something else here, she said excitedly. Vera Ivanovna came up and helped her granddaughter carefully rip the seam. Inside the lining, in a specially made hiding place, were jewelry, diamond earrings, a massive bracelet, and a ring with a large stone. Everything was wrapped in soft fabric and carefully sewn up. Krylov took the jewelry in his hands, recognizing the gifts he gave his wife for various anniversaries. She always said that she didn't like jewelry, wore it only at official events, but it turns out she hid it in her clothes, probably afraid that I would take it away during the divorce. Vera Ivanovna carefully examined the stones, assessing their quality with her unprofessional, but experienced eye. These are very expensive things, she said. Maybe they will be enough for Artyom's treatment. Krylov immediately called a jeweler he knew, who agreed to come for an assessment. Despite the late hour, the elderly man, with a magnifying glass in his eye, studied each piece of jewelry for a long time, checking the samples and quality of the cut of the stones. Very good things, he delivered his verdict. The earrings cost about $100,000. The bracelet is $150,000, the ring $50,000. In total, it comes to $300,000, maybe a little more if you find a suitable buyer. Krylov felt how Nadezhda was beginning to revive in his chest, but then he realized that this money was not enough. The operation needed $2 million, and they only had $300,000. There was practically no time left to look for the rest of the amount. He began feverishly calling his former business partners, begging them to lend him money at any interest rate. But they all refused, citing their own problems or unwillingness to get involved with a bankrupt under investigation. Victor, we worked together for 20 years, he said into the phone to one of his former partners. You know that I always repaid my debts. This is a matter of my son's life and death. But in response he heard only excuses and promises to think about it, which meant a polite refusal. The business world quickly forgot past merits when it came to money and reputation. Nastya silently watched Krylov's desperate attempts to find money, seeing how with each unsuccessful call he sank deeper into despair. And at the orphanage at this time, Artyom was fighting for his life and every hour could be his last. Suddenly Svetlana entered the room with a cup of tea and a stack of documents in her hands. Igor Nikolaevich, I was sorting through the papers that your ex-wife sent for the insurance company, she said uncertainly. There is a list of all the things thrown out for compensation for damage. Krylov mechanically took the documents, not particularly interested in their contents, but Vera Ivanovna asked to show her the list, and her eyes widened in surprise when she read to the end. Quote, Igor Nikolaevich, look here, she said excitedly, showing a line on the list. It listed jewelry worth $2.5 million as lost during the move. Krylov reread the line several times, not believing his eyes. Belina told the insurance company that she had lost the jewelry and received compensation for it, but she hid it in her jacket, which she then threw away, apparently forgetting about the hiding place. Quote, this is fraud, Vera Ivanovna said quietly. She had received insurance for jewelry that she had not actually lost, and now we have evidence of her deception. Krylov felt not only hope but also righteous anger flare up in his chest. Belina had not only refused to help him save his child, but had also turned out to be a fraudster who had robbed the insurance company of millions of dollars. He immediately called the insurance company with which he had a long-standing business relationship. The director agreed to meet with him the next day, despite the day off, when he heard about the possible fraud for such a large amount. But there was almost no time left. Artyom was getting worse in the orphanage, and the doctors did not hide the fact that every hour was counting down. Krylov understood that even if the insurance company agreed to return the money, the bureaucratic procedures could drag on for a week. I recommend listening to these two stories that you see on the screen. I am sure that you will like them, and in the comments to this video you will find a link to a selection of the best stories from all over the internet. Thanks for watching. The next morning, Vera Ivanovna, Nastya and Krylov went to the insurance company's office. In their hands they had a box of jewelry, documents about the paid insurance and Svetlana's testimony about how things were thrown away after the divorce. Krylov looked exhausted after a sleepless night, but his eyes shone with the determination of a man who is fighting for the life of his child. The director of the insurance company, Mikhail Petrovich Sokolov, received them in his office on the 20th floor of the business center. He was a middle-aged man with penetrating eyes and sunken temples, who in 20 years of work in the insurance business had seen all sorts of fraudulent schemes. Igor Nikolaevich, I remember our cooperation in the best times, he said, shaking Krylov's hand. What brought you to me in such a situation? On the phone, you talked about jewelry fraud. Quote. Krylov took diamond earrings out of the box and put them on the table. My ex-wife reported these pieces of jewelry as lost during a move and received $2.5 million in insurance for them. But, as you can see, they never disappeared. Sokolov carefully examined the jewelry through a magnifying glass, comparing them with photographs from the insurance file. The serial numbers on the stones matched, and the cut and characteristic inclusions left no doubt about their authenticity. His face became more and more serious as he studied the documents. These are indeed the very same jewelry, he stated. And here is a certificate from the jeweler about their loss during transportation. It turns out that your ex-wife deliberately deceived our company, receiving a payment for the allegedly lost property. Vera Ivanovna told the whole story from the very beginning. How did Nastya find the jacket near the dumpster? How were Artyom's medical documents discovered? How did it turn out that the jewelry was hidden in the lining of discarded clothes? It turns out that your ex-wife hid the jewelry in her clothes, then threw the clothes away. Reporting the loss of the jewelry to the insurance company, the old woman explained, and then received full compensation for them, essentially stealing. Sokolov nodded, making notes in his notebook. This is classic insurance fraud. We will immediately file a complaint with law enforcement agencies and initiate the procedure for returning the illegally obtained funds, but I must warn you, the process may drag on for months. Krylov felt the ground slipping from under his feet. Mikhail Petrovich, my son, is dying in an orphanage. He has a rare form of leukemia. An urgent operation is needed in Germany. The countdown is in days, not months. The director of the insurance company thought about drumming his fingers on the table. Over the years, he learned to distinguish real despair from attempts to play on pity. In the case of Krylov, there was no doubt. In front of him sat a father, ready to do anything to save his child. There is one option, he said slowly. We can pay you compensation immediately, as the injured party of the fraud. But for this we need an official statement to the police and your consent to testify against your ex-wife. Krylov did not hesitate for a second. I agree to any conditions. File a statement, call the investigators. I am ready to give any testimony against Alina. Sokolov called his lawyer and asked him to urgently prepare the documents. An hour later, the economic police arrived at the office and filed a statement of fraud on an especially large scale. Krylov gave a detailed account of the circumstances of the divorce, about throwing things away, about how the hidden jewelry was found. Nastya and Vera Ivanovna also testified as witnesses, telling how they found the jacket and discovered a cache of jewelry in it. Their story sounded so natural and convincing that the investigators had no doubts about the veracity of their words. We will immediately send a request to Interpol to detain your ex-wife in London, the senior investigator said. In the meantime, let's draw up all the documents to return the illegally obtained funds. While the lawyers were preparing the papers, Krylov's phone rang. It was Nina Petrovna from the orphanage, and her voice was shaking with excitement. Igor Nikolaevich, come immediately. Artyom's heart stopped, but the doctors managed to resuscitate him. He is in critical condition. Krylov turned pale, clutching the phone in his hand. How much time do we have? He asked, trying to keep his voice calm. The doctor says a few hours, a day at most, the head of the clinic answered. We need to urgently take him to a specialized clinic, otherwise we will lose him. Sokolov, who heard the conversation, quickly went to the safe and took out a stack of documents. We have an emergency procedure for special cases, he said. I can give you a check for the full amount of compensation right now under a personal guarantee and a receipt for the return, if any discrepancies suddenly come to light. He quickly filled out a bank check for $2.5 million and handed it to Krylov. That's all we can do in this situation. I hope your son gets better. Krylov took the check with trembling hands, not believing that salvation had finally been found. But then he realized that banks were closed on weekends, and cashing such an amount would not be easy even on Monday. Mikhail Petrovich, the banks are closed, and there is no time, he said with despair in his voice. How can I get this money immediately? Sokolov thought for a moment, then decisively picked up the phone. There is one person who can help. A private banker, works with large sums at any time, but charges high interest rates for urgency. Half an hour later, a representative of a private bank arrived at the office, who agreed to cash the check immediately for a 10% commission. Krylov signed all the documents without reading the terms. Every minute could be Artyom's last. While the financial documents were being processed, Vera Ivanovna contacted the German clinic that was listed in Artyom's medical reports. The head doctor agreed to admit the boy immediately if emergency transportation could be arranged. Krylov immediately contacted a company providing air ambulance services. A specially equipped plane with resuscitation equipment and a team of doctors could take off from the airport. 2 hours later, when all the formalities were completed and the money was transferred to the clinic's account, Krylov felt a mixture of relief and horror. Salvation had been found, but there was catastrophically little time left. Every minute of delay could cost his son's life. They rushed to the orphanage, where Artyom was in intensive care, connected to life support machines. The boy was unconscious. His small body seemed so fragile among the medical equipment. The doctor explained that the child's condition was critical, but stable. Transportation was possible, but extremely risky. Every minute of the flight would be a fight for life. Krylov leaned over his son's bed and quietly whispered, "Hold on, baby. Daddy won't leave you. We're flying to the best doctors in the world." Quote, a month in a German clinic seemed like an eternity to Krylov. He never left his son's bedside, watching every stage of the complex treatment. The bone marrow transplant lasted 8 hours, and all that time he walked down the corridor, praying to all the gods he had ever believed in. Professor Muller, the clinic's leading specialist, regularly informed him about the progress of the treatment, but medical terms merged in the father's head into one continuous stream of hope and fear. Artyom took a long time to recover from the operation. He spent the first 2 weeks in intensive care, connected to many machines. Krylov sat next to him, held his little hand and told him about the life they would build together when they returned home. Gradually, the boy's condition stabilized and then began to improve. First he opened his eyes, then he started talking, and a week later he could sit up in bed. Professor Muller was pleased with the results and said that such positive dynamics were rare. "Dad, is it really you?" Artyom asked quietly when he first clearly realized what was happening around him. "Mom said that you were a very busy person, but you would definitely come for me." Krylov could hardly hold back his tears, looking at his son, who finally looked like an ordinary child, and not a dying patient. "Yes, baby, it's me, and I will never leave you again. We will always be together now." Quote. When the doctors allowed Artyom to get out of bed, Krylov led him to the window, which overlooked a beautiful German town. The boy looked with admiration at the neat houses, well-kept gardens, and children playing in the yards. "And we have friends there at home too," Krylov said. "Aunt Vera and a girl Nastya, who helped us find each other. They really want to meet you." Artyom nodded, listening to Russia's father's stories about the home where they would soon return. During the month of treatment, he had noticeably strengthened, gained weight, and most importantly, a lively childlike interest in the world around him had appeared in his eyes. The flight home was scheduled for Saturday. Professor Muller personally escorted them to the airport, giving Krylov detailed recommendations for further monitoring of the boy's health. Quote, "Artyom is completely healthy," he said at parting, "but for the first 6 months, you will need to regularly take tests and see doctors." On the plane, Artyom pressed himself against his father and quietly asked, "Where will we live? Do you have a big house?" Krylov realized that during the month in the hospital, he had not thought about everyday issues at all. The mansion where he lived with his ex-wife had been sold to pay off debts, and he had no other housing. Quote, "We will think of something," he answered, stroking his son's head. "The main thing is that you are healthy, and the rest will be taken care of." Vera Ivanovna and Nastya met them at the airport. The girl immediately ran up to Artyom and handed him a teddy bear. Quote, "This is a gift for you," she said shyly. "I chose it myself." Artyom took the toy and smiled, his first real childish smile in many months. "Thank you," he replied, "and you are the same Nastya who found Mom's documents." Quote, Nastya nodded, and the children immediately found a common language, starting to chat animatedly about all sorts of things. Vera Ivanovna looked at them with affection, and Krylov felt how the ice that had formed there over months of depression and despair was finally thawing in his heart. While they were driving from the airport, Vera Ivanovna told him about the latest news. Alina was arrested in London a week after their departure. At first she denied the charge, but when she was shown photographs of the found jewelry, she was forced to admit fraud. She was extradited to Russia the day before yesterday, Vera Ivanovna continued. The investigator said that the case is very serious, a long sentence is threatened, and the insurance company has already transferred the remaining money to your account. Krylov nodded, but his thoughts were not occupied with his ex-wife, but with the future with his son. During Artyom's treatment, he thought a lot about what kind of life he wants to build: business, career, money. All this faded into the background in front of simple human happiness. "And where are we going to spend the night tonight?" he asked Vera Ivanovna. "At a hotel? Or maybe you have some suggestions?" Quote, "I have a surprise," the old woman smiled. "While you were gone, I looked after your affairs. I found a wonderful house in a good area, not far from the school and kindergarten. The owner agreed to sell it at a reasonable price." The car stopped near a 2-story house with a large garden and a spacious yard. Artyom gasped in delight when he saw a swing under an old apple tree and a small playground with a slide. Quote, "Is this our house?" he asked, not believing his eyes. "If you like it, then yes," Krylov answered, hugging his son. "Here we will begin our new life." Quote, the inside of the house turned out to be even better than the outside. Bright rooms, a modern kitchen, a cozy living room with a fireplace. Vera Ivanovna showed Artyom the children's room, which she furnished, focusing on the boy's age. "And this is your room," she said to Krylov, opening the door to the spacious bedroom. "And another room for guests. I think there's enough room for everyone." Krylov realized that Vera Ivanovna was tactfully hinting at the possibility of living together. Over the past month, he had come to appreciate her wisdom, kindness, and practicality. Besides, Artyom needed female care, and Nastya needed male support. "Vera Ivanovna, what if we all live together?" he suggested. "You and Nastya have medical experience that could be useful to Artyom, and I have the opportunity to provide everyone with a comfortable life." The old woman thought about it, weighing the offer. Quote, "It would be right for the children," she agreed. "They need a full-fledged family, and we can create one." In the evening, when the children fell asleep in their new rooms, Krylov and Vera Ivanovna sat in the living room by the fireplace, discussing plans for the future. He said that he was going to do charity work, helping sick children receive expensive medical treatment. "You know, over this month I realized that real wealth is not in money," he said thoughtfully. "And that you have people whom you love and who love you." Vera Ivanovna nodded, adjusting the blanket on her knees. And I realized that sometimes a chance find can change the lives of many people. If Nastya had not asked permission to take that jacket, they would have been silent, thinking about the strange chain of coincidences that had brought them all to this moment. The jacket thrown away in anger, the curiosity of an 8-year-old girl, the conscience of an old doctor and the despair of a father, all came together in an amazing story of salvation. Quiet laughter came from the nursery. Nastya and Artyom were whispering about something before going to bed. Krylov smiled, listening to these sounds of a new, real life. Quote, "Thank you," he quietly said to Vera Ivanovna, "for not passing by, for risking interfering in someone else's life. You saved my son." "We all saved each other," the old woman answered wisely. "And now we have a chance to become a real family." Quote, the first spring snow was falling outside the window, but the house was warm and cozy. Krylov looked at the fire in the fireplace and thought that sometimes you need to lose everything to find the most important thing.